Welcome to Happiness in the City. This is Barbara, and it's such an honor to be here and have this beautiful communication with you. Today, I continue my reflections on the topic of political lamentations. I've been doing it for a few months now, and it is a very important topic because we often deal with great tragedies and misfortunes in politics, and we don't really know how to deal with the emotional aspects of dealing with such difficult situations. And Psalm 69 is a psalm written by King David, and he, as a political leader, had to deal with a lot of difficult situations, and this psalm shows his response to the sorrow in his heart and in his soul that was created by this deep sadness. And last time I talked about what his call was to God with respect to the pain in his soul. So we know now that political leadership has to deal with their own souls, that there is this higher level of being within us than just flesh and blood communication, that we have that amazing creation that is a part of every single human being called soul. And today I want to continue with the situation in which the king has to have the right understanding when he is attacked by all kinds of foes. And that creates a very interesting dimension in politics, because the leader here complains about all the dangerous people attacking him. He's not directing his conversations and attention to them, but he is telling the Lord, his God, about what he's dealing with and asking God for help. So this is a very different way of dealing with security than what we are used to know, because the current ways of security tell us that we should deal with those who endanger us. But here's security at a different level. It is security in conversations between political leader, King David, and God. So it's an incredibly interesting dimension. It's very interesting to me. Somehow no one taught me about that. With all my upbringing and growing up in church, this topic was pretty much avoided. And yet it is so important, because we can get God's response from a level that we couldn't reach without him. So he complains to God that there are all of those who hate him without a cause. Today we call them haters, and that they are more than the hairs on his head, and that they will try to destroy him. Yet they are very mighty, and they force him to restore in them what he didn't take away. So this is a big complaint to God, and we deal with very similar situations today. Haters, so-called haters, all kinds of ways of distraction, whether legal or communication distractions, and then all kinds of people are forcing other people to restore things that they think are part of justice, but they really had nothing to do with that, because that concept of justice comes from laws that favor certain ways of visualizing property, and we have a lot of this today that is very tragic. Whole communities disappeared because of a lack of security for their properties. Whole villages, small cities, intergenerational community, settlements, intergenerational family homes. All of those things disappeared because of the property law that focuses on finance, like mortgages, then on stability and intergenerational peace and heritage. So, like, instead of like in the old days, that's when I still have the memory connection. My grandfather was a builder of houses, right? In the old days, you build a house, and the couple would get married and have the house paid off, and the entire focus was on bringing family and maintenance of the house, and that was also designed to be inexpensive. So house was considered a form of necessity to create stability of families and to provide stability for upbringing of young generations. Today, the banking language of finance doesn't even have that concept. This concept doesn't exist today in financial markets. So we have a situation in which whole cities are forced to restore debts that are really not debts. They are forced to restore with their own lives what was taken from them, and they didn't have opportunities to focus on what is valuable for them and what is the right scope of ownership for them. So that is a very important way for us to know that maybe we got things wrong in the way the organization of relationships between what we have and what we owe. And I think that we need to really look seriously into those matters, because the way the current divisions are unfolding is not going to bring joy and happiness to the nation. It's going to create more pain and more suffering and more lamentations. So here we see that we should turn to God in political leadership to show us how to do things in a right way. So this is what King David is showing us that he's doing. He's describing what he feels and what the situation is, but then he's asking God to bring divine light to this and also divine solutions, so that those haters will know better ways and will not do those things that cause so much harm. The king here continues that it is not easy to publicly show his relationship with God, because that causes some to reproach him and to force him to have shame. So this is another thing that we have to deal with, is how to deal with this conflict between political fame and political shame, caused by the very fact that political leadership would turn to God for answers. And I think that when we look at the world today, there is no interest in divine fame. People who would try to publicly admit that they want to consult God to give them advice for all kinds of financial and administrative ways, people like this are ignored or made fun of. And I think this is a big mistake, because we also know the entire story of King David, and we know that those who focus on God's fame and want to bring fame to themselves through God, they always win. Sooner or later, but they always do. Whereas those who shame others for focusing on the Lord, they perish. So this is a situation in which we know the long-term outcomes of receiving fame from God in the context of politics, and the lamentations that are caused by many who would attack such leadership. So we have a situation today that God is just not mentioned in political discussions among global leaders. People want to decide destinies of nations, billions of people, and they reproach those who tell them that maybe you should ask God about it, like He created all of us. So we have a situation of extreme separation, of searching for God to bring in His fame to politics, and the the fear of being shamed because of that of the way to ask God to help us in those tragic situations. And we have a lot of pain in the world today. The very serious wars, conflicts in Europe, all kinds of ways in which people are kept in control and they don't feel any joy in their lives. So we have to understand that maybe the error is that global leadership totally ignores what King David did, ignores consulting with God and receiving his remedies for difficult situations that the world is today. One of the obvious examples is how we deal with wars. The schools that teach war techniques, to teach about weapons, they just focus on wars. They don't focus on peace. And this actually is what is different from the times of Cold War. Because that generation, my generation and older people, we understood the need to have language of peace. So there was Cold War, but there was also language of peace. And today we don't have it. We don't have language of peace, just language of war. And when it's added to the fact that people ignore doing what King David did, in other words, consulting with God how to deal with those wars, then the situation becomes desperate and hopeless. So I think that we should rethink the heritage that we have, that instead of focusing on doing everything ourselves, we should learn what our ancestors did, what King David did, what great leaders in the world did in the past. They consulted God, the way they had access to him and the way he could reach them. It's different in different nations, but there is this huge tradition of understanding how important it is. And I think that we may learn a lot from certainty that God is interested in helping political leaders, but on his terms, because he's God. So I think that we will have to develop will to do it, instead of reproaching those who actually communicate with God, that we should encourage this and then ask God to create within us communication languages that will allow us to receive his peace, his vision of peace, but also his words of peace. And when we have that, then there's hope. So in the current situation, I encourage all leaders of the world, people in the world who are connected with them, to ask God to do it, This is something that everybody can do directly to God. We have that capacity within human heart to acknowledge that God is real and to ask Him to help us in this at all kinds of levels we are in, but He will answer it, He will direct us. And I think that that should be the way we should continue as mankind. And at the most joyous way, it is the most liberating way of living, because it creates that connection with God that here we see between King David and God, in which we are directed by Him, and when we respect Him, then we receive His respect too. And I think that is the hope for the world. I believe that today there is a certain paralysis among world leaders. So I ask God to bring in His presence to souls of political leaders, that they will receive motion of peace that will allow them to see that there are higher ways of dealing with politics than what they are doing right now. And that message is for not only for leaders of nations, but also for leaders of corporations, for financial leaders, for church leaders, for leaders in synagogues, all people who have authority and got stuck in keeping that authority away from actually communicating with God about politics. And I think that that authority that King David shows in his Psalms is the most beautiful way to relate to each other that we can have. Because once we understand that God is the one who provides the right measure, then this whole situation of being forced to pay for something we didn't take disappears, because then everybody gets the right measure every day of their lives. So the authority that can come from God brings also the right measures of wealth, the right measures of development, the right measures of peace. And I think that when we receive in our hearts power to understand that it is of vital importance to us, we'll develop security measures that are harmonious with this, that create real sense of security and safety. In some ways, I think that the world today lost that sense of security and safety, that whatever measures we have right now are sort of haphazard ways of making up for it. And I ask God publicly to provide to us that feeling, connection to His heart, that will allow us to understand that true sense of security and safety comes from Him letting us touch His heart, and knowing that we are loved by God, that He is interested in us from the moment we were created throughout all our lives, and that He's also interested in us living with Him in heaven. So I think that in the tragedy that we have today in the world, that lamentation of political leadership that would be directed to God would also create His response to bring healing and virtue. So, as important it is to have a system of justice, but if the Lamentations only come from one group of people interested in justice to another, they miss the healing opportunity that presence of God would bring to resolve difficult situations by His virtue, His new life, and His ways. So I wish all of you great Thanksgiving, and as we thank God for the beautiful country we live in, the United States of America, we ask God to bring in His virtue and His fame to all political leadership, not only in America, but throughout the world. And I think that that would be the greatest way to resolve current conflicts, and that is the way in which political paralyses that stopped ability to receive peace will end, and we will have true peace from divine government of God. Thank you so much for listening to those remarks, and see you here next time.